There's all the makings of a constitutional crisis as members of the Trump administration today, sitting in the Oval Office, say they will defy the United States Supreme Court's order to facilitate the return of a Maryland father who was wrongfully deported to El Salvador, as Trump himself says that he wants American citizens to meet the very same fate. In a photo spray today with the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, Trump sitting by and smiling as Bukele claims that he has no way to return Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a father of three who was in the United States legally before he was deported. Trump saying instead he should be congratulated.
Mr. President, you said that if the Supreme Court said someone needed to be returned, that you would abide by that. You said that on Air Force One just a few days ago. And they said that it must be facilitated.
Why don't you just say, isn't it wonderful that we're keeping criminals out of our country? Why can't you just say that?
Trump's defiance was echoed and celebrated by his advisors in the room, who say that despite the ruling of the United States Supreme Court, the cabinet will not be working to send Kilmar Abrego Garcia home to the U.S. to his family. Attorney General Pam Bondi, Stephen Miller, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio all saying that they will not be doing anything to bring Garcia home and that they are not required to do so. They went on to accuse Abrego Garcia of being a member of the gang MS-13, completely contradicting their own lawyers who have admitted in court that there were no grounds to deport him and that his deportation was a result of, quote, an administrative error. The Supreme Court ordered last week that the U.S. government must facilitate his return. But Trump didn't stop there. He continued in his embrace of this defiance, going on to say that he is open to sending American citizens to the same notorious El Salvadorian prison as Abrego Garcia is in, which is illegal. U.S. citizens cannot be deported from the U.S.
They're great facilities, very strong facilities, and they don't play games. I'd like to go a step further. I mean, I said it to Pam. I don't know what the laws are. We always have to obey the laws, but we also have homegrown criminals that push people into subways, that hit elderly ladies on the back of the head with a baseball bat when they're not looking, that are absolute monsters. I'd like to include them in the group of people to get them out of the country.
How many illegal criminals are you planning on exporting to El Salvador? And President Bukele, how many are you willing to take from the U.S.?
As many as possible. And I just asked the president, you know, it's this massive complex that he built, jail complex. I said, can you build some more of them, please?
Trump's open defiance of the United States Supreme Court is where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. NBC News White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard is here. Also joining us, former top official at the Department of Justice, MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissmann is here. Former federal judge Michael Ludick will join us in a couple minutes. Vaughn Hilliard, I start with you.
When we watched here inside of the Oval Office just earlier this afternoon, Nicole, was striking not just because the President of the United States was there, but members of his cabinet, including his own Attorney General. And the U.S. Constitution makes it clear, the Eighth Amendment, that cruel and unusual punishment is not allowed inside of the United States. And in just minutes before the two men sat down there in the Oval Office, there was actually video that was rolled in real time, not from American media outlets who did not have access at that point in time, but it was actually from President Bukele's social media team that was live streaming video in which President Trump was talking about the videos that El Salvadorians had put out showing the detainees, the deportees, getting off aircraft from the United States with bent over, with their hands shackled behind their backs, and led fiercely into those mega prisons. And the President of the United States said that people were eating them up and that they appreciated them because that he was taking criminals seriously. And while the President Trump was sitting next to President Bukele referred to Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the Maryland father, as a terrorist. And there was no pushback from the president or anybody inside of that room. And I think this gets at the heart of the Supreme Court case here that is ordered his facilitation to be returned to the United States. We expect here over the course of the next hour, the government, based off of the district court's determination, must provide provided to the court an update on efforts to facilitate his return to the United States. That's due by 5 p.m. Eastern time. And as to what the government is actually doing to facilitate his return, well, over the course of that nearly hour inside of the Oval Office, there wasn't a single request made by the president or any member of the cabinet to have Kilmar Abrego Garcia return to the United States as the Supreme Court ordered, and instead the question was left up to President Bukele, who made it clear that he had no intent of returning the Maryland man back to the United States.
Vaughn, let me ask you about something else that's going on. This is Senator Chris Van Hollen earlier today describing the inability of Congress, a co-equal branch of government, to get information about their own constituents.
This is unsustainable. I mean, the Trump administration's position, in my view, is absolutely unsustainable, as is the position of the president of El Salvador, if he's going to say that he's not going to release this man who our own courts, 9-0 on the Supreme Court, have said really should be coming home now. They are clearly just snubbing their nose at the courts, including the Supreme Court. And the courts, in my view, need to exercise their ability to sanction people who ignore court orders.
Von Hilliard, what does the White House say to Senator Van Hollen?
Well, the question that the senator from Maryland wanted was a meeting with President Bukele, and that meeting never came. And he had suggested that he is going to go to Maryland himself, or go to El Salvador himself, to the prison, to try to gain access and make the statement clear that the answers must be provided to the U.S. Congress. And I think one of the parts of this here was, I was actually called up an administration official this afternoon, making, I guess, with the question of why not just return Kilmar Abrego Garcia to the United States, go through the immigration judicial process to determine whether he should stay in U.S. detention facility or be deported, because it was an immigration judge in 2019 who ordered his release inside of the United States and not to be returned back to El Salvador, because the immigration court suggested that he would potentially be a target of a gang in El Salvador if he were to be returned. And this administration official who I talked to told me, quote, the administration doesn't want him back. Why go through the process to bring him back? Which, again, hits at the heart of the question also that the president suggested was the potential of sending, quote, homegrown individuals, U.S.-born citizens to El Salvador. The president has a willing partner who is willing to detain these individuals, and yet clearly has no interest making the case, as Stephen Miller, the deputy chief of staff inside of the Oval Office this afternoon, said, it would be, quote, arrogant of the United States to tell another foreign leader what they should do within their own sovereign territory, making the case it is no longer within the U.S.'s jurisdiction to request or order President Bukele to return Kilmar Abrego Garcia or anybody who the U.S. may down the line ship and deport to El Salvador from its mega prison system.
I mean, Vaughn, that's nonsense. I mean, the answer to your source, why go through the hassle to bring him back, is because by a ruling of 9-0, the Supreme Court said so. And clearly, sitting next to Donald Trump, he is Donald Trump's puppet when it comes to how to deal with people we deport there. He'll do whatever Donald Trump tells him to do. Donald Trump told him to build more prisons, and he didn't seem too upset about that. What is the actual reason why they're openly defying a 9-0 ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court?
I think that, number one, you're looking at an attorney general and a president of the United States who are willfully resisting the orders of the judicial branch. We are watching that play out here in real time. I think the second part of that is this administration official told me that they have the evidence that Kilmar Abrego Garcia is, in fact, an MS-13 leader and was rightfully deported to El Salvador, to which I pushed back, saying, why not present that evidence to us in the media if, in fact, that this individual is not a sympathetic figure and should have been on the streets of the United States or in Maryland for the last 6 years like he has with his family, then turn over that evidence. And yet that information has not been provided. And over the course of the last weeks, Nicole, let's be clear, they have had the opportunity in multiple court filings and before a judge to make the case that Comar Abrego Garcia should not be in the United States and it was rightfully deported under the Alien Enemies Act. And yet they have not provided any further evidence outside of what was the anonymous informant back in 2019 that suggested that he was, in fact, an MS-13 gang leader. And I think that is where a lot of these question marks go. But in the meantime, when we're talking about the power of the president, to your question, Nicole, in so many ways, we are watching him not only go on the attack in the trade war against some of our closest allies, but in the case of President Bukele, it was a year ago that Don Jr. was at his inauguration. Matt Gaetz was at his inauguration. And in some situations, he has found a willing partner who is able to go forward, despite calling himself the world's coolest dictator, this being President Bukele. This is somebody who the President of the United States sees as a much more willing partner and ally of the United States than some of our previous closest allies who he has gone forcefully on the attack of during this trade war in these preceding weeks.